When it comes to American elections, few things are as hotly debated as voter ID laws. Are they just a common sense safeguard? Or are they a barrier, designed to keep certain people from casting a ballot? This question, it really cuts to the heart of what a fair election even is. So let's get into it.
Okay, picture this. It's election day. You've been waiting in line, you finally get to the front, you're all ready to vote, and the poll worker asks to see your ID. So do you actually have to show one? The answer might not be what you think.
Well, the simple answer is there is no simple answer. It all depends entirely on where you live. See, there's no single national rule for this. Instead, we've got this kind of messy patchwork of state laws. And that, right there, is why this whole thing gets so intense.
Basically, this whole debate boils down to two completely different ways of looking at the same thing. For proponents, showing an ID is just a common sense safeguard. It's about making people feel confident in the results. But for opponents, they see it as a partisan barrier, something specifically designed to make voting harder for certain people. All right, so let's dive into that. A simple idea, but a really fierce debate.
So on one hand, the case for these laws is pretty straightforward. Prevent fraud and build confidence. The idea is that requiring an ID stops someone from, say, pretending to be another voter. But the case against it is just as strong. Opponents say, look, there's just no evidence that this kind of fraud is a big problem. They argue these laws are actually meant to suppress votes, specifically targeting people who are less likely to have a government-issued ID. We're talking low-income folks, minority communities, and younger voters. For them, getting the right documents can be a real hurdle because of the cost and time involved. But here's where it gets kind of weird. While the politicians are at war over this, the public, well, they actually seem to agree. These laws are surprisingly popular. I mean, check this out. A 2021 poll found that 93% of Republicans and, get this, 61% of Democrats support requiring a photo ID to vote. That's a huge majority, even across party lines.
So, if they're so popular, what do these laws actually look like on the ground? Let's dig into that patchwork of state laws.
Okay, so right now, 36 states have some kind of voter ID law on the books, but some kind is doing a lot of heavy lifting there because the rules are all over the place depending on the state. You can basically lump these state laws into four main buckets. First, you've got your strict photo ID states, like Georgia and Indiana. There, you have to show a photo ID, period. No ID, no vote, right then and there. You have to come back later with it. Then you have non-strict photo ID states. They'll ask for a photo ID, but if you don't have one, there are other options, like signing a statement. Third, there are states that require some ID, but it doesn't have to have a photo. And finally, you've got states like California and New York, where for most voters, you don't need to show any ID at all.
So how in the world did we end up with this complicated mess? Well, these laws didn't just pop up out of nowhere. To really get what's happening today, you gotta look at how we got here. Believe it or not, the first voter ID law was passed way back in 1950 in South Carolina. But for decades, it was mostly a fringe idea. Things really started to pick up steam in 2002 with the Help America Vote Act. Then came a huge moment in 2008. The Supreme Court upheld Indiana's super strict photo ID law. The court basically said that preventing fraud was more important than the potential burden on voters. And that decision, it opened the floodgates. But the real game changer was in 2013. A Supreme Court decision, Shelby County versus Holder, gutted a key part of the Voting Rights Act. It removed the requirement for certain states with a history of discrimination to get federal approval before changing their voting laws. And what happened right after that? A wave of new, much stricter ID laws swept across those states. Which brings us to the biggest question of all. Forget about the intent for a second. What is the actual impact of these laws on the ground? And to really get a sense of the stakes here, you just have to look at what happened in North Carolina. In 2016, a federal court struck down their voter ID law, and the language they used was, wow. They said the law targeted African Americans with almost surgical precision. The court found that the lawmakers had actually asked for data on how different races vote, and then wrote the law in a way that would hit Black voters the hardest. So, okay, let's circle back to the reason we're told these laws exist in the first place. What problem are they supposed to be solving? Right, the whole point, officially, is to stop in-person voter fraud. And we need to be really specific about what that means. This is the only kind of fraud these laws can stop. It's when one person physically shows up to a polling place and pretends to be someone else to cast a fake vote. So, the million-dollar question. How often does that actually happen? Well, all the research points to the same answer. Almost never. It's extremely rare. One huge study looked at over 1 billion ballots cast since the year 2000 and found just 31 credible cases of this kind of fraud. I mean, to put that in perspective, you are literally more likely to be struck by lightning.
Okay, so if the problem they're designed to fix is, well, barely a problem at all, what's the flip side? What's the impact on eligible voters who are just trying to do their civic duty?
Well, this is where we see something called the ID gap. Study after study shows this. For example, a recent report found that Black and Hispanic citizens are roughly twice as likely as white citizens to not have a government-issued photo ID. And that right there, that's the heart of the argument that these laws are discriminatory, even if the laws themselves don't say anything about race. But does that gap in having an ID actually lead to lower voter turnout? This is where the research gets really interesting and honestly a little mixed. Some studies do find small drops in turnout, especially among minority voters. But then a lot of other studies find no real effect on turnout at all. There was one big study that suggested maybe any negative effect gets canceled out by all the effort from groups that mobilize to help people get the IDs they need. So the overall takeaway from most researchers, these laws don't seem to have a major election-swinging impact on the final results.
And this complexity is exactly why this debate isn't going away. You know, back in 2005, there was a bipartisan commission led by Democrat Jimmy Carter and Republican James Baker. And they basically concluded that, well, both sides have a point. They said, yes, the kind of fraud these laws stop is super rare. But they also said requiring a photo ID could help build public confidence in our elections. So you can see the dilemma.
Which brings us right back to the central nagging question of this whole thing. If voter ID laws are designed to stop a type of fraud that's almost non-existent, while at the same time creating real hurdles for some legitimate voters, what problem are they really trying to solve? Is it about voter confidence? Is it about security? Or is it about something else entirely? And that, right there, is the question at the very heart of the great ID debate.